I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate that introduction. And frankly, life has just lots and lots of interesting twists and turns, because it seems like only yesterday I was actually sitting out where you're sitting. And I remember watching Reed Dirtsey, I believe is how he pronounces his last name. He was an economics professor, and I had my macroeconomic class in this very room. And I didn't ever really think that anyone would ever be interested in anything that I would have to say, or certainly wouldn't come fill the room. So I hope that in my little effort at 20 minutes here that I don't disappoint you, and then we will make sure we save some time for questions. I think each of us has a little touch of salmon built into us in some way, because I think we all like to come home. And so for Bonnie and for me, this has been a very, very fun day, and just simply a flood of memories. I love the mountains, and certainly the beauty of Cache Valley is something that we can all relate to, and I certainly enjoy seeing again. And so this has been to be in the classroom, to take a tour of the campus, to enjoy a breakfast with President and Mrs. Albrecht, and also to have a chance to spend some time with Dean Beck Dudley here. Very, very positive for me. And I appreciate our gracious student hosts. And then some surprises for me to see Dr. Larzette Hale. I guess the flood of memories sometimes overtakes you, but I have huge respect for that woman and what I learned from her. And then also Floyd Peterson, one of my partners, who recruited me. And I began my Deloitte career after being recruited off of this campus. But I do appreciate, and I love the theme that you described of School of Opportunities, and opportunities multiply when they're seized, because I really feel like that describes who I am, and that describes, I think, what I've done. And I believe it describes what I've done with my the beginning that I had here. My friends sort of tease me a little bit about what I do now, because they ask me, what is a kid from a town of 400 doing leading an organization with 31,000 employees? And in some ways, I suppose it's a hard question to answer. But I do appreciate the opportunities that I was able to take advantage of here, and the doors that I believe my education here opened for me, and that a son of a forester and a school teacher could enjoy working in one of the great cities of the world. I think New York City is the greatest city in the world. And I'm not particularly objective about this. And so I will also say that I think Deloitte is one of those really special, very, very special firms. A very, very unique place. A very, very unique partnership. A 2-second commercial about Deloitte, so we don't spend our 20 minutes with a commercial about Deloitte, but just a couple of seconds about Deloitte. We are a professional services firm, a very, very different professional services firm than any other firm that's in the marketplace today. We are the only firm that continues to pursue the strategy that once 8 firms were pursuing, and built some very, very large businesses from what once was a rather small presence in the marketplace. But we today have over 30,000 people. Our revenues are over $7 billion. We are a very, very diverse organization, because about a third of our business is audit and audit-related type services, about a third of our business is tax and tax-related services, and about a third of our business is consulting and advisory type services. We're the only professional services firm that looks like that. And the way that I like to express it when I'm interviewed or otherwise describe our strategy, why are we pursuing a strategy that no one else seems to be pursuing? And I like to borrow the line from the Robert Frost poem where he says, the road diverged in the woods, and I took the one less traveled, and that has made all of the difference. And we as a firm are very much on the road less traveled. And I believe it is making all of the difference, because I think we can very uniquely and very effectively add more value for our clients than can our competitors, because of the diverse set of competencies that we enjoy. And we also have a very, very impressive footprint with a client relationship, a meaningful client relationship with almost 3 of 4 of the Fortune 1000. And I think for a professional services firm to be able to claim that kind of a client share is very impressive. and I'm very, very proud of our partners and who we are and what we do. What I'm going to try to do quickly is just talk very, very briefly about the journey that created the opportunity for me to have the seat that I enjoy, and how that opportunity we were able to create, or we were able to take advantage of, or I'm happy to say with the words of the Utah State College of Business, we were able to seize that opportunity. I graduated from here in 1974 and had opportunities to go to work for any of the then Big 8 firms, and we had the opportunity to sort of choose the city that we were going to work in, whether we wanted to work on the left coast or the right coast, or whether we wanted to stay in the Mountain West. And we decided that we were going to stay in the Mountain West because our family was here, and we thought, Bonnie and I talked about this at the time that we were accepting that offer, that if we ever decided we wanted to leave the Mountain West, we would have that opportunity. But if we left, it would be harder to come back if we decided that we wouldn't be happy outside. And so we spent our first 5 years working in the Salt Lake City office with my partners here that I'm very, very fond of even today. And if I tried to talk about some of those experiences, I'd become emotional again and I'd get embarrassed. But I'm very, very fond of these men and what we have learned together and what we've done together. But as someone 27 years old, we were raised here in the West and married to a beautiful Utah girl, also raised here in the West. That was a pretty big move for us because we walked away from our extended family here, and we walked away from everything that was familiar to us here. And we stepped out into that world, and it is a big world. And we fell in love with the East Coast, and we fell in love with New York, and we fell in love with New England. And our kids think they're from there, even though we're from here. This is at least where we began our careers, and our parents are from here. I think our children think they're East Coasters. But the door of opportunity that we walked through really created huge, huge, huge advantages for us. And I'm thrilled with what I've been able to do and the experiences that I've been able to have and the network that I enjoy. This is a fascinating time in professional services, and it's a fascinating time in the accounting profession because we've been through a massive transformation, absolutely massive transformation. Leaders are fond of talking when they speak about business or they speak about challenges. They're fond of listen to them anytime, talk to any business leader, listen carefully to what they say. And the one soundbite that you will constantly hear coming is change. And they will talk about change in the external environment. They'll talk about change in the internal environment. And they'll talk about the ability to be agile and take advantage of the opportunity that change creates. And as I reflect on our business over the last 2 or 3 years, I don't think about change alone. I think about the magnitude of the change and the velocity of that change, which I think makes it different than what we've experienced in the past. We've always had change, but we've never seen change with the magnitude that we see today and with the velocity that we see occurring today. And so I'm very proud of this profession of which I am a part. I'm very proud of this firm that I have the privilege of leading. And I believe that we today stand tall in those ferocious winds of change because of a values-based approach and because of a principles-based approach to who we are. I've got 2,600 partners. None of them get up in the morning and look for an email from me telling them what to do that day. Fortunately, I'm delighted. I don't want to direct their activity. I couldn't direct their activity. But what we can do is by sharing principles and by sharing values, we can lead this large organization. We can lead it in a very, very effective way. And the way that I like to try to express that notion of values, or that the importance of values, or this principles-based approach to leadership, is I like to think about it in the context of just individual poise. And sometimes, I don't know if any of you are football fans, but if you watch Tom Brady of the New England Patriots, watch him in the pocket. 27-year-old kid sitting in that pocket. The pocket's collapsing around him. And what is he able to do? His head is up. He's looking down the field. He's able to find a receiver. Bonnie and I had a chance to go to the Super Bowl last year as Philadelphia Eagles fans, but we were a little disappointed. But Tom Brady has unbelievable poise in that pocket. Unbelievable poise in that pocket. And when I talk about values and I talk about principles and I talk about an organization being led in a values or principles-based way, what I want to see happen is I want that values-based approach to create individual poise on the part of that professional. And if that individual in a values-based way has that individual poise, when you aggregate it and roll it together, you end up with institutional poise. And we're able to then deal with, in a very, very aggressive environment that we have, and in a very, very challenging world that we have, we're able to deal with the pace of change that is just simply breakneck. And we're able to preserve our brand, we're able to preserve our image, we're able to preserve our reputation. As a product of that, to emphasize this notion of integrity, this notion of values, and how fundamental that has been in my journey, I actually believe that my partners elected me to lead our firm at this point in time because they have confidence in me as they look at me as a values-driven person. And they believe that I am the right person to be leading this firm at this time that we are going through such intense challenge and such a massive transformation. And that values-based approach, that notion of fundamental, good old-fashioned words like integrity, like ethics, I believe has been the underpinning of my career, because I think I've had integrity as I've dealt with my partners. If they asked me to do something and I committed to do it, I did it, because I wanted them to trust me, and I did that with integrity. And what breaks my heart is if we believe that this notion of integrity is too old-fashioned and doesn't need to be spoken of and isn't particularly relevant. And then to just simply emphasize that point, I share with you the results of a survey that we as a firm have done with junior achievement. And I find this tragic, but it simply emphasizes my point that we can't take for granted this idea of personal integrity. We conduct a program with junior achievement called Excellence Through Ethics, and part of the underpinning of that program is a survey that we do of high school students. We send them a survey form and ask them a series of ethical questions, and they then simply have to check a box and send it back. There's no CEO leaning over their shoulder. There's no CFO pushing on them. There's no market forces trying to reward them economically if they perhaps will push the envelope. So just think about that for a minute. 650 high school students filling out this form. Here's one of the questions that we asked. If there was no risk of getting caught, would you act unethically to get ahead? 650 high school students, nearly 45% said yes, or they weren't sure. When asked if they would act unethically if instructed by their boss to do so, nearly 45% said they might or they would. When asked if they would lie to their boss to cover up a mistake, 45% said yes or they weren't sure. You're not very many years separated from those high school students who are responding to those questions. And if your moral compass is that confused, then I'm very concerned about the future of your careers. I'm very concerned about the future of this business community. Because we can't have a defect in that area. We need to get that 45% and make it zero the way that we think and act. And I will tell you that this notion of acting unethically to get ahead isn't how you get ahead. It's how you get out of an organization. Because you won't last at my firm. You'll be gone. One strike like that and you're out as far as I'm concerned. And I believe the way to get ahead is to act ethically. Now we've witnessed and watched this enormous event that was associated with the bursting of the dot-com bubble, the slowing of the economy, and then the market correction that followed the revelations of the very, very widely reported scandals. And what happened, for those of you that are historians, you'll remember that the stock market, measured at least by the Dow, went from 11,700 to 7,700, almost a 33% drop, as significant as the drop that occurred at the time of the Great Depression in the 30s. And what happened then was the securities laws were rewritten in 33 and 34, and audits were then compelled and were required if you wanted to participate in the capital markets. And so what happened the next time? The markets fell by 33%, accompanied by very, very significant disclosures of scandals. But once again, the securities laws were reformed, the most pervasive reforms that have occurred since the 30s. And Sarbanes-Oxley was enacted. And what power, the legislators were convinced they would be corrupt, and they would then misreport their financial information. And so audit committees were dramatically strengthened as a very, very important element of corporate governance to sit on top of those executive officers. The role of the auditor was augmented and enhanced. And I'm very proud of how we perform that role and what we do. And I'm very proud of the firm that I have the privilege of leading. And I'm proud of this institution that I hail from. Wonderful opportunity for you, an exciting time. The most exciting time to be entering the business community with the pace of change that we see. And if you will, walk through that door of opportunity when it opens and not be artificially constrained in terms of the world of opportunity that you're willing to take advantage of. This is an exciting time, a wonderful time. I need to stop because I've already violated my 20-minute rule. I'd love to go on and on, but Bonnie knows me too well. She knows that I should stop now. So I'm going to look at her and take her body language. So I will stop and be happy to answer any questions that you might have on any of that or on anything that you want to talk about. Please.
Not specifically touching on the topic of ethics, but I suppose it could apply. In the current world that we live in, where nations and other companies are able to collaborate so much more with people that they didn't have the facility to collaborate or communicate with before, how are you competing with audit firms and professional services firms from other countries that are bidding on some of the same projects that Deloitte bids on?
What we've done is we've actually built a presence in India, and we have today 3,000 employees of the U.S. firm are in Hyderabad and in Mumbai, and we've done that to preserve jobs within Deloitte because that's what we need to do to be able to compete for some of these large-scale projects. But I'm a free trader. I absolutely believe in free trade, and I believe that we all benefit from free trade. And those labor markets and the labor arbitrage that is evidenced by that are very, very real. And consulting fees have been on a southerly slope for about 6 or 7 years. The average rate per hour of a consulting project has been coming down for 6 or 7 years. They've now stabilized and actually starting to move back up. But we're doing it by having a very strong presence in India ourselves. And those people that we compete with for those projects also have very strong presence in India and in China. There's a huge talent pool that you're competing with. And that's going to make you better. And it's going to make us better.
Just to follow it up, are there any ethical challenges associated with that? Because of differences in culture that individuals or companies that you associate with possibly don't share the same code of ethics?
Anytime you're working cross-border and you're working with folks who actually have a different set of social mores that they might have been raised with, there'll be a challenge. But the values that we have in Deloitte are the same on a global basis, and the training and the commitment to ethics and to compliance and to integrity is unwavering. And I don't believe that we even move one iota as we try to move across borders. The challenge is higher because you're dealing with so many different cultures and so many different languages. But you still have to be operating in a zero defects kind of mode. Other questions? Please.
What recommendations do you have for students who are aspiring to become leaders?
The key is you've got to, I think, be able to find your way to the top of that stack of resumes. Last year from campuses, we probably hired, I don't know, I should know this number, but I think it's close to 3,500, 4,000 people. In China, I know this number because I just heard it from our Chinese partners meeting. We hired 600 students on campuses in China, 15,000 resumes for those 600 seats. And I believe, we hired last year in total, both campus and experienced hires. We hired about 9,000 people, over 90,000 resumes for those 9,000 seats. And so you need to be able to distinguish yourself on that resume. You need to be able to convince me that you have a value proposition, that I should want you to be part of my firm. You need to have a very, very strong academic performance to be able to get on our interviewing list, to be able to have the opportunity to interview. You've got to have performed well and demonstrated a real commitment to excellence in academics. And then strong, relevant work experience is enormously helpful. And then in that interview, when you get your 30 minutes of fame, you've got to be able to sell yourself. You've got to be able to make me want you to be part of my organization. I don't do the recruiting. Floyd recruited me. I don't know how I convinced Floyd to offer me a job, but I worked hard at it. I worked very hard at it. And I was very aggressive in packaging myself because I wanted a job in public accounting in Utah. And I knew there were 450 kids graduating with accounting majors in Utah, and I knew there were 16 seats. I wanted one of those 16 seats. And I went to work to earn the right to get there. And those are the kids that we're looking for on campus. Please.
How did you balance the rigorous career commitment and your family at the same time?
I married the most beautiful, most capable woman in the world. And we just share lots of things. When we left Utah and moved to New York the first time, I tried to just preserve the weekend. And the weekend was, I think we've done it different in almost every location, frankly. During those New York years, Saturday and Sunday was family time, and I tried to stay away. I would be 1 hour on the phone maybe on Saturday. I tried to stay off the phone on Sunday. During our St. Louis years, I made a commitment I'm going to have one meal a day with the family. And what I did was I decided that was going to be breakfast. The kids were in school, and we would get up, we'd have breakfast together. The kids would head for the bus, I'd head for the car, and I'd go to work. And I wouldn't often be home for dinner. But I would try to have one meal a day with the family. And then what I do today, I think that we are blending our life more than we're balancing our life. And Bonnie came to Atlanta to our partners meeting because she was helpful to me at our new partners meeting because we invite spouses to our new partners meeting. She was helpful to me with our retired partners. We invited spouses to our retired partners. Bonnie is very, very effective at working the room. I know how to work the room, I think. And then Bonnie went with me to South Africa. And then 2 weeks later, Bonnie went with me to China. And this week, when I was in San Francisco on Wednesday, on Tuesday night, I stayed at my son's apartment in Palo Alto. And instead of going to the Fairmont Hotel in downtown San Francisco, I stayed with my son and his wife. And the next morning, he got up, rode the train with me into San Francisco. We jumped in a cab, went to the Fairmont, had breakfast together. And then Morgan headed back to school, and I headed to my board meetings. But right now, I might describe it more as blending than balancing, frankly. And the seat that I have is a pretty demanding seat. But I have tireless support from Bonnie, and I've had tireless support from my kids. I've asked them if they think they've paid a price as a product of their father's career ambitions, and all three of them say, absolutely not. They feel like they are children of privilege, driven by the opportunities that they've been able to take advantage of with having lots of friends in the Midwest, lots of friends on the East Coast, lots of friends in the West. They have a very, very balanced view of the world, I think. But I'm not objective about that either, by the way. Other questions? Please.
Earlier in another class I was in, you touched on the entitlement mentality. And I was curious how devastating that could be to a career if someone goes in with an entitlement mentality and they don't get rid of it. What kind of repercussions can it have on it?
We were in another classroom, and I spent some time on one of my favorite themes, which is being able to jettison the entitlement mentality, and what a huge burden I believe an entitlement mentality is. So that if you sit out there saying, my academic training and receive my degree, I'm entitled to a terrific job. Somebody give me that terrific job. If you think about it in that kind of way, that you're entitled to something and you're waiting for someone to bring it to you, you're going to miss some massive opportunities because there's going to be 100 people who who are going to out-hustle you to get the seat that you might want, while you're sitting back waiting for someone to come offer you the seat that you think you're entitled to. So inside the organization, when I come across that entitlement thinking, and I'm allocating units to my partners, and some of my partners feel entitled to a particular unit allocation, but they don't have the performance that actually goes with that. We have a pretty tough discussion on what it is that they need to do next year if they want that kind of a unit award, and what the expectations are, and how they need to be able to perform. But you have to be able to chase that entitlement thinking away. And to the extent that we think this is the United States of America, and I'm entitled to anything that I want in this great country, you're going to be bitterly disappointed. If you'll throw away that attitude and replace it with, this is the United States of America. This is an unbelievable country. This is a country that was built by the children of immigrants, with people who had the first college education in their families. And then watch what those kids do. Many of them are my partners. Many of my partners are the first college education in their family. They know what their mother and father did to create a college education opportunity for them. Go meet my partners in New York. Go to lunch with them. Talk to them about their youth in the Bronx. Talk to them about what it was like growing up in Newark, New Jersey. Ask them how they feel about being a Deloitte partner. And you're meeting some people who didn't grow up with an entitlement mentality, and they're proud of who they are, and they're proud of the firm that they're a partner in. Because if you'll replace the entitlement mentality with, I love your theme of opportunity, if you'll replace that with, this is a world of opportunity. I'm going to seize the opportunities that I have and take advantage of them. Now, the world is the limit. You can be a little boy from a town of 400, and you can lead an organization of 30,000 people. I run into people with my background at the top of our organizations all the time. One of the privileges of being a CEO, if you think about a day in the life of a CEO, there's not any real day in the life of a CEO, frankly, that is the same. Because I go from conference room to conference room, and Ava, my EA, comes in and just sort of moves me from one room to another as she's got the next meeting teed up. But one of the privileges of the position of carrying a CEO business card is you get access to lots of CEOs and talk to them about their backgrounds. You find lots of them that look just like me in terms of their background. This country is absolutely built by the children of immigrants. Think about that for a moment. These immigrant families came to this country looking for a better opportunity than they had in their homeland. And what was that mother and father able to do? Minimum wage jobs. They had no access to this economy. But what did they want their children to have? Something better than they enjoyed. And so what did they do? Read Mike Krzyzewski, the coach of Duke, the #1 basketball team in the country. Read his book. Read about the Polish neighborhood of South Chicago where he grew up. Read about what his mother and father did to put him through school. And think about Mike Krzyzewski when you see him on the sideline. And think about the values that he has. And think about how he thinks about those things. I don't think Mike Krzyzewski went to Army to be the basketball coach at Army with an entitlement mentality. He knew what his mother and father did on the south side of Chicago to create an opportunity for him. But that entitlement thinking is hazardous. It will cost you a fortune. Because what you're entitled to in this country is opportunity. And then it's completely up to you what you do with those opportunities. But you are not entitled to a three-car garage and a lovely house and 4 cars where you can't even get them in your 3-car garage. That is not what you're entitled to. What you're entitled to in this country is opportunity. A country built by the children of immigrants. I am very, very proud of this country and the opportunity that we have and the jobs that we create. Other questions? Please.
Is this a value-based leadership
I mean, is this a constant struggle?
Let's talk about the settlement first of all for just a moment, because I do have very, very strong feelings about that. And I spent more than a few months in terms of working our way through that. Our public servants, for reasons not necessarily clear to me, but if I wanted to try to jump in their shoes, perhaps I would understand it. But they've decided that their enforcement activities are going to be conducted in the court of public opinion, not necessarily in the court of law. And we see regulators today fighting in that court of public opinion and then using their enormous force to bully companies into settlements in an effort to try to make an example of them and try to influence the actions and behavior of others. And that settlement that we had in the Adelphia matter was the largest settlement that the SEC had ever extracted from an accounting firm. And we thought very, very long and hard before we ultimately agreed to that settlement. And then, in this seat, you finally have to just simply make judgments, and that's what we've done. Now, how do you enforce it? Let me just share with you. Bonnie, I made reference earlier that Bonnie and I went to South Africa, and I'm very, very proud of our practice there. We have a leading practice there, an outstanding practice there. And they've taken this notion of this values-based approach to leadership, and they have translated it to truly personalize it in a very, very real way. And the way that they've translated it, one of our shared values in the firm, we only have 4, but one of our shared values is integrity. Now, it's hard to think about that. Well, what does that mean to me as an individual? It's easy to say that an organization or an institution should have that as a shared value. Almost everyone will. What our partners in South Africa have done is they have translated those values into a series of I statements. I, a member of the Deloitte family, a member of the Deloitte team, these are the things that I commit to do when I sign on to be part of Deloitte. I treat everyone with respect and appreciation. One of our values is strength from cultural diversity. You can imagine what that's like in South Africa as they are working to transform that economy. And they're working to rebalance that world. But every member of that family in South Africa, I treat everyone with respect and appreciation. I make a personal difference by embracing diversity. Think about that in South Africa. I make a personal difference by embracing diversity. Now think about that integrity value. I build relationships founded on trust. Commitment to each other, another one of our shared values. Think about this I statement that you're signing up for. I am aware of the impact of my actions on others. And then the last one, I stand for, and I stand up for Deloitte. But I think the way that you actually can try to take a values-based approach to leadership and be able to drive it into a large, complex organization is you have to take that institutional view of values, and it has to at some moment become personal. And when it becomes personal and you start to then get aligned, now you can have an impact. And I think a very, very positive and a very, very real one. Other questions? Please, in the back in the sweater. I don't think that, again, back to my entitlement speech, I don't think that if you want to participate in the capital markets that you're entitled to an opinion from a Big Four firm. I'm only going to serve clients that value our services. That's code for saying if somebody doesn't want to pay our fees, I don't want to serve them. You can look at it that way if you want, and maybe you can say that I'm too aggressive commercially. But I don't think so. I'm responsible for 31,000 people. We share a brand with 120,000 people around the world. I'm going to be enormously cautious who I'm willing to give my brand to as I express an opinion on those financial statements. And we will absolutely continue to have very, very high client acceptance standards. And we will not serve people who do not value our services. We will not serve people who do not respect Sarbanes-Oxley. We will not serve companies that are not committed to having meaningful systems of internal control. Do you want to buy stock from a company that isn't willing to represent to you that they have an approach and a system and a process to prepare timely, reliable financial information? If you want to buy stock in those companies, you can if you want to. I wouldn't want to. I don't even want those companies participating in our capital markets. And so if one of them is not willing to demonstrate a commitment to building meaningful control systems, I don't want to be associated with them, and we resign. And I'm unapologetic about it. Other questions? Didn't mean to sound so preachy there. Please. I'm a really nice guy. Ask me something because I'm embarrassed about it. I apologize for that, by the way. But I do feel pretty strongly about where our brand goes. Please.
Yeah, for your very value-driven, you ever thought about making a public space? Most people love that.
I'll tell you, our public servants, I do have huge respect for them. I spend lots of time down on the Hill, walking the halls and just simply working that side of our agenda, because it is very, very important. I was with a CEO last week, and he told me almost matter-of-factly that today a CEO spends more time with their public relations department than they do with their engineering department. And that's because of this court of public opinion that I earlier referred to. We have a number of wonderful public servants. They have a tough seat. They have a very, very tough seat. They do sometimes disappoint us. And sometimes our business leaders disappoint us also. They do. And when we see them with a very, very significant seat of trust, and then they disappoint us, that's hard. And what happens is, and it's happened definitely to my profession, I'm passionate about my profession. We've been painted with a pretty broad brush over the last 4 or 5 years in a way that I think is not fair. But what happens to you personally, what happens to us institutionally, you build a brand, you build an image, you build a reputation over a very, very long period of time, but you can destroy it in an instant. And then you have to go to work on trying to rebuild again. Let me just try to be respectful of our time and wrap up. And I am sorry that I got a little too preachy there. But I do feel pretty strongly about who I'm willing to serve, and I do think it is the right thing for us to do. But let's end on a very, very positive note, and that would be, I believe, very, very strongly that this is a wonderful time. I mean, this is an absolutely wonderful time. I'm an old man. I wouldn't necessarily want to go back and try to relive these 31 years again from when I left here. But you have a unique opportunity at a unique point in time in the history of the business world. And so I leave it where your dean started it, as you talk about the theme of a school of opportunities. And opportunities really do multiply when they're seized. That absolutely happened for me. On that first New York assignment, it opened a whole bunch of other doors. Getting in the Deloitte door opened a whole bunch of doors. Here's the last thought that I'll leave you with. I had a calculus class here, and I was actually pretty good at calculus, Dr. Hill. I was pretty good at accounting also, by the way, but I was pretty good in calculus. And it was Professor Underwood was the professor that I had the class from, and I remember what he said, and it got burned in the back of my brain, and frankly, it has even driven much of what I've done. And so I'll give you, from Professor Underwood, this both thought and challenge. And what he said was, what you have when you leave Utah State University is not an education. What you have are the tools to obtain one. And so take your degree, and what the degree is going to do for you is open the book of opportunity, and then walk through that door and go obtain that education by learning every day and just committing yourself to lifelong learning. And as you do, your value is going to just simply continue to increase, and your ability to sell your services to me, or to sell your services to one of my competitors, or to sell your services to one of the great companies of this country, or one of the other great companies anywhere in the world, if you'll commit yourself to lifelong learning, and you won't think that that's a process that ends when you walk across that platform and pick up that degree, you've got a bright future in front of you. But just think about Professor Underwood's thought. you have not obtained an education at Utah State University. You've obtained the keys that will open the door for continuous learning and then to really obtain that education, obtain those marketable skills. But you've got a bright future in front of you. This is a time to be really, really excited. We've never seen a time like we have right now in terms of the pace of change. And think about that change as sometimes people say the only people who like change is a baby who needs one. But think about change as creating opportunity. Because that's in fact what happens, is change creates opportunity. Seize it, and you'll have a brilliant, wonderful career. I certainly have enjoyed what I've been able to do from starting, sitting in the very seats that you're sitting in. Thank you very much today.